A luxury family vacation takes a dark turn when racist police officers wrongfully detain a father unaware he's an FBI agent. How will this explosive truth change everything? Subscribe now to see the story unfold. The Harrison family had been planning this vacation for months. Agent Thomas "Tom" Harrison glanced in the rearview mirror, smiling as his two teenagers, Jamal and Nia, debated the best activities they'd do at the hotel. Next to him, Rachel, his wife, reached over and squeezed his hand, her face radiating relief. "It's about time," she said with a small laugh, catching his eye. "We all needed this." Tom nodded, aware of how overdue this trip was. His job with the FBI often consumed his days and nights, pulling him into a world of high-stakes investigations and classified operations. Rarely did he get a chance to just be with his family. This vacation at the luxurious Belmont Hotel, nestled in the heart of the city's high-end district, was meant to be a reprieve, a chance to breathe, reconnect, and forget about the demands and dangers of his work. The Belmont was known for its polished marble floors, enormous chandeliers, and breathtaking views. The exterior glistened under the late afternoon sun, the entrance flanked by manicured hedges and bronze sculptures. It was the kind of place where high class was the rule, and Tom, as much as he despised pretense, wanted to give his family a taste of something special. After months of planning, this trip was their escape, their long-awaited chance to celebrate their bond as a family. As they entered the hotel lobby, Jamal and Nia's eyes widened, their gazes sweeping over the opulence of the surroundings. A polished grand piano sat in the corner, filling the air with gentle jazz, and an enormous glass chandelier hung like a crown above the pristine marble floor. Guests strolled by in suits and evening gowns, their voices hushed, their movements relaxed. "Wow," Nia breathed, clutching her phone. She took a quick selfie, capturing her awe. "This place is like a palace." Tom grinned, watching his daughter's excitement. He glanced at Jamal, his quiet, contemplative son, who was studying the lobby with equal curiosity but less obvious enthusiasm. Tom knew Jamal was noticing more than the grandeur. His son had always been perceptive, attuned to people's expressions and actions. They approached the check-in desk, where a young woman with a professional but stiff demeanor greeted them. Her eyes darted over them quickly, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "Welcome to Belmont," she said smoothly. "Are you checking in?" Tom nodded. "The Harrison family. Reservation under Thomas Harrison." The receptionist's fingers paused for a second on the keyboard, a brief hesitation so subtle that only Tom caught it. She quickly recovered, typing as she scanned the screen, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something, an evaluation, a calculation. Tom had encountered that look countless times before in his line of work, but he brushed it off. They were here for a break, after all. He pushed aside the pang of discomfort and focused on his family. "Here are your key cards," the receptionist said, finally handing over a sleek leather folder. "Enjoy your stay." They made their way to the elevator, Rachel laughing as she nudged Tom's shoulder. "Did you see her face? It's like she was shocked we even had a reservation here." "Yeah," he muttered, forcing a smile. "It's fine. Let's just enjoy ourselves." Up in their suite, the family took in the view of the cityscape sprawling beneath them, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows. Jamal and Nia darted around, exploring every corner of the suite, while Tom and Rachel exchanged contented smiles, grateful for this moment of peace. But as they settled in, little things started to stand out. Room service took unusually long, and when it arrived, the server's manner seemed rehearsed, his words clipped. The doorman downstairs had watched them with a slight frown as they entered earlier, and one of the cleaning staff had lingered in the hallway, their eyes following the family as they passed. That evening, they decided to explore the hotel's amenities. The Belmont had a reputation for elegance, with its sprawling pool deck and an upscale restaurant boasting a beautiful view. Rachel suggested dinner by the water, eager to make the evening memorable. They strolled down to the restaurant, their laughter and easy conversation a stark contrast to the formal ambiance around them. But as they entered, a brief silence settled over the room. Heads turned, diners paused. It was subtle, a shared glance here, a slight shift in posture there, Whispers passed under breaths. Tom felt a twinge of unease, the same instinctive alertness that kicked in during high-pressure operations. They were led to a table by the window, but even there, the tension lingered. A waiter approached them, visibly hesitant. "Are you new to the city?" the waiter asked, his tone polite but curious, as if the presence of this particular family were an unusual sight in such a setting. Tom forced a smile, keeping his voice steady. "Not really, just here to relax." The waiter nodded, but he didn't seem convinced, and Tom caught him glancing over at another table, where two men in suits were watching them with barely concealed interest. Rachel took Tom's hand under the table, sensing his discomfort, and shot him a reassuring look. "Let's not let it bother us," she murmured softly. "We're here to enjoy ourselves, remember?" He gave her hand a squeeze, grateful for her calm presence, but the feeling in the pit of his stomach remained. He glanced at Jamal and Nia, who were busy chatting about the city skyline, oblivious to the tension around them. Yet Tom knew he couldn't shake it off. He'd been trained to read people, and his instincts were screaming that something was off. He told himself that he was overreacting, that he was here as a father, not an agent. But part of him couldn't ignore the signs. "Dad, are you okay?" Nia asked, noticing his expression. He forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, honey, just making sure everyone's having a good time." As the night went on, though, he found it harder and harder to believe that nothing was wrong. After dinner, the family headed back to their suite, laughing and recounting funny moments from the meal. Yet, as they rode the elevator up, Tom's smile faded, his mind running over the small signs he'd observed throughout the evening. The hesitation, the stares, the awkward service. It was like pieces of a puzzle, pieces that didn't yet fit, but hinted at an image he wasn't ready to see. Back in their room, he leaned on the windowsill, staring out into the night. The city was glittering, lively, oblivious to his unease. For once, he wished he could let his guard down completely, but his instincts kept flaring up. Something was amiss, and if he wasn't mistaken, the worst was yet to come. The next morning, Tom woke early, the uneasy feeling from the night before lingering like a shadow. As he sipped his coffee and looked out over the city, he resolved to shake it off. This trip was for Rachel, Jamal, and Nia. They deserved a distraction-free break. But deep down, he couldn't ignore the creeping sense of foreboding. By the time the family came down to breakfast in the hotel's sunlit dining area, the lobby was bustling with guests. As they approached the hostess station, the hostess glanced at them, her expression briefly flickering with something Tom recognized as judgment. It was so fleeting that anyone else might have missed it, but Tom was trained to notice details. She recovered quickly, pasting on a neutral smile. "Good morning? Table for 4?" she asked. "Yes, thank you," Rachel replied, smiling warmly. The hostess led them to a table near the back of the room, far from the expansive windows and views that other guests enjoyed. Tom exchanged a look with Rachel, both of them aware of the subtle slight. Rachel's mouth tightened, but she shrugged and pulled out her chair without comment. As they settled in, Jamal's eyes darted around, his expression a mix of discomfort and frustration. He'd always been a keen observer, sensitive to the cues around him. "Did they really have to seat us back here?" he muttered, his voice low. Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let's just enjoy breakfast," she said softly, but her gaze drifted toward the tables by the windows, where families laughed and clinked glasses, oblivious to the quiet indignity the Harrisons were experiencing. Tom decided to let it slide. He knew how these things could go. Push too hard, and you're labeled as difficult, too sensitive. Besides, he didn't want Jamal and Nia to feel even more uncomfortable. He tried to make light of it, pointing out the impressive spread of pastries and fruit on the buffet. As they helped themselves, a middle-aged man with a newspaper under his arm entered the room, his eyes scanning the crowd. He glanced at the Harrisons briefly, his gaze lingering on Tom and Jamal a second too long before he looked away. The man approached the hostess, whispering something to her, and they both glanced back at the family, exchanging looks that were neither subtle nor friendly. Rachel's jaw clenched, and Tom could feel her tension beside him. "Are they serious?" she whispered, barely containing her irritation. Tom placed a hand on her arm. "It's fine, Rach. Let's just get through breakfast. But he couldn't help noticing the ripple of unease among some of the other guests. It was in the way they shifted their gazes, in the way they leaned toward each other, whispering. Even Jamal noticed, growing visibly more agitated, his face tightening as he watched the subtle but constant scrutiny they faced. As they finished breakfast, Tom noticed a hotel security guard loitering near the entrance to the dining area, pretending to be absorbed in something on his phone. When the family finally rose to leave, the guard made a point of turning his back to them, his posture tense and defensive. On their way back to the lobby, they passed a tall man in a charcoal suit who appeared to be waiting, his gaze focused on Tom with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The man had an official air about him, perhaps someone from management. Tom nodded politely as they passed, but the man merely stared, barely returning the gesture. It wasn't until they reached the lobby that the situation escalated. "Excuse me, sir," a voice called from behind them. Tom turned, catching sight of the hotel security guard walking toward them with two other guards in tow. Their expressions were guarded, professional, yet beneath the surface, he detected an edge of hostility. Tom braced himself, positioning himself slightly in front of Rachel and the kids. "Yes?" One of the guards cleared his throat, feigning a polite smile. "We just wanted to check in with you, sir. We've had some, complaints about unusual activity." "Unusual activity?" Tom repeated, arching an eyebrow. He kept his voice calm, his demeanor professional. "Yes," the guard replied. "Some guests reported suspicious behavior in the lobby last night." Rachel's eyes widened, disbelief etched across her face. "Suspicious behavior? We were just eating dinner and heading to our room." The guard maintained his composed expression. "We understand, ma'am, but you know how it is. We're required to look into any reports." Tom's patience began to fray, and he took a step forward, keeping his tone steady but firm. "I understand you have protocols, but we're paying guests here. Is there a specific issue you're concerned about?" Jamal, who had been quietly watching, couldn't hold back any longer. "Why are you really asking us this?" he challenged, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "Jamal," Rachel murmured, gently placing a hand on his shoulder, trying to diffuse the situation. The guard's polite facade slipped just a little, his gaze shifting to Jamal with a trace of disdain. "We're simply doing our job, young man," he replied, his voice patronizing. "If you have nothing to hide, then there shouldn't be a problem." Tom took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. He knew this type. Men who wielded power carelessly, assuming they could intimidate anyone who didn't fit their mold. He glanced around, noticing that a few guests had stopped to watch, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to open discomfort. "All right," Tom said, lifting his chin. "If you're done, we'd like to get back to our day." The guard held his gaze for a long moment, and Tom could see the frustration simmering behind his expression. Eventually, the guard nodded. "Of course, enjoy your stay." As they walked away, Tom could feel the weight of the guard's stares on his back. Rachel's hand was gripping his arm tightly, her expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. Jamal and Nia were unusually silent, absorbing the exchange, processing the quiet but undeniable insult of it. Back in their suite, the family tried to shake off the unsettling encounter, but the tension lingered, thickening the air. "I don't get it," Nia said, pacing around the living area. "Why did they treat us like that? We didn't do anything wrong." Rachel hugged her, murmuring softly, "Some people see what they want to see, honey. They don't care about the truth." Tom sat down heavily on the couch, his mind racing. He'd seen the underbelly of discrimination in his career before, but it hit differently when it happened to his family, especially his children. He glanced at Jamal, who sat silently, staring out the window with an intensity that worried him. "Jamal," Tom said gently, moving to sit beside his son. "You okay?" Jamal didn't look at him, his jaw clenched. "I don't know how you can stay so calm, Dad. They just look at us and assume that we don't belong, that we're some kind of threat." Tom placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder, feeling the tension in his son's body. "I know it's not fair, and I know how angry it makes you. But we can't control how others see us. We can only control our own actions. Jamal finally looked at him, his expression dark and pained. But what's the point, Dad? You've always told me to be respectful, to follow the rules. And look what happens. It doesn't make a difference. The words stung, and Tom struggled to find an answer. He knew Jamal was right, and the feeling of helplessness gnawed at him. As much as he wanted to protect his children, he couldn't shield them from the ugliness of the world. "We'll get through this, son," he said finally. "Together. You've got to trust me." But as he spoke, Tom couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was only the beginning, that the world wasn't done testing them yet. The rest of the day passed in a strained silence. Tom did his best to keep his family distracted, suggesting a trip to the nearby museum, a walk through the city gardens, anything to take their minds off the encounter in the lobby. But the air of suspicion seemed to follow them, a dark cloud hanging over their every step. The day had been long, and by the time the Harrison family returned to the hotel that evening, they were physically and emotionally drained. Tom tried to keep his guard up, but as they approached the elevators, his instincts kicked in, sensing a subtle yet undeniable shift in the atmosphere. They hadn't been back in the hotel for more than 5 minutes when they felt eyes on them again. This time, not just from guests, but from hotel staff as well. As they waited for the elevator, 2 security guards appeared at the far end of the hallway. Tom recognized one of them from their encounter in the lobby earlier that day. The guard was watching them intently, his expression grim. Tom tensed. "Stay close," he murmured to Rachel and the kids, positioning himself between them and the approaching guards. Just as the elevator doors opened, the guards quickened their pace, one of them calling out, "Excuse me, sir, we need a word." Tom let out a slow breath, doing his best to stay composed. He turned, meeting the guard's gaze. "Yes?" The guard came to a stop a few feet away, crossing his arms as he looked Tom over. "We've received additional complaints," he said, his tone flat, as if rehearsed. "Several guests have expressed concerns about suspicious activity involving you and your family." Rachel stiffened beside him, and Jamal and Nia exchanged bewildered glances. Tom's jaw clenched, and he spoke slowly, keeping his tone measured. "Suspicious activity? We're guests here, just like anyone else. What exactly are you accusing us of?" The second guard, younger and clearly trying to appear authoritative, shifted uncomfortably but held his ground. "Look, we're just following protocol. We've had multiple guests report seeing you acting out of place." "Out of place?" Rachel repeated. "What does that even mean?" The younger guard avoided her gaze, his cheeks reddening slightly. "We're just doing our job, ma'am." Tom's patience was wearing thin, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Look, I've tried to be polite, but this is getting ridiculous. We haven't done anything except enjoy our vacation. I'd like you to explain exactly why you're harassing us." The first guard's face hardened, a subtle sneer slipping through his professional mask. "Sir, I'd advise you to watch your tone. We're only trying to ensure the safety of all our guests." The implication was clear, and it made Tom's blood boil. His hands clenched at his sides, and he took a step forward, narrowing his gaze. "And what makes you think my family is a threat to anyone's safety?" For a moment, there was silence, thick and charged. The guards exchanged a look, and the first guard's expression grew colder. "You need to understand that this is a private establishment, and we have the right to remove any guests we feel may be disturbing others. I suggest you cooperate." Jamal took a step forward, anger flashing in his eyes. "Are you kidding me?" he said, his voice steady but trembling with frustration. "We haven't done anything wrong. Why are you treating us like criminals?" The younger guard's face darkened. "Lower your voice, son," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "or we'll have to escort you off the property." Tom placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder, trying to calm him, but he could feel his own anger simmering beneath the surface. He met the guard's gaze, his voice firm. "If you're going to make baseless accusations, you'd better have something to back them up. Otherwise, I'd suggest you step aside." But the guard's expression remained defiant. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us to discuss this further." Tom's patience finally snapped. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out his FBI badge and holding it up for the guards to see. "I think it's you who needs to watch your tone. My name is Special Agent Thomas Harrison, FBI. Now, if you'd like to continue this conversation, I'd be more than happy to bring my department into it." For a brief moment, the guards hesitated, glancing at each other with a mixture of confusion and unease. Tom could see them reevaluating the situation, their bravado faltering in the face of his credentials. But before they could respond, a voice crackled through one of their radios. "Backup requested on the lobby floor. Possible disturbance. Suspects identified." The guards straightened, their previous uncertainty replaced by a renewed sense of authority. The first guard gave Tom a dismissive glance. "Badge or not, sir, you and your family are going to need to come with us." Tom's heart sank as he realized the futility of the situation. These men were committed to their assumptions, uninterested in the truth. He took a steadying breath, forcing himself to remain calm. "Fine. Let's go." The guards escorted the family back down to the lobby, their presence causing a ripple of murmurs and stares from guests as they walked through the opulent hallway. Jamal's face was flushed with anger, while Rachel clung to Nia, her expression a mixture of fear and disbelief. When they reached the lobby, they found two police officers waiting for them, their faces set in a combination of suspicion and impatience. Tom's stomach tightened. This had escalated far beyond anything he'd anticipated. One of the officers stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Tom. "We got a call about a disturbance involving your family. Mind explaining what's going on here?" Before Tom could answer, the first guard cut in. "This man and his family were acting suspiciously, and several guests felt uncomfortable with their presence. We're just trying to ensure everyone's safety." Rachel's face flushed with anger, and she opened her mouth to protest, but Tom squeezed her hand, silently urging her to stay calm. The officer raised an eyebrow. "Do you have identification, sir?" Tom held up his badge once again. "Special Agent Thomas Harrison, FBI. I don't appreciate my family being treated like this. We've done nothing wrong, and I'd like to know exactly what these so-called suspicious activities entail." The officer's eyes flickered over Tom's badge, and for a brief moment, it seemed like he might reconsider. But then his expression hardened. "We'll be the judge of that, Agent Harrison. If you're really who you say you are, you won't mind answering a few questions at the station." Tom's heart sank. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It was a direct, unspoken accusation. He could feel Jamal and Nia tense beside him, the weight of the officer's words settling heavily on all of them. "Fine," Tom said, his voice cold. "But I'm calling my department to make them aware of what's happening here." He pulled out his phone, dialing the number for his FBI supervisor. But just as the call connected, one of the officers stepped forward and grabbed his arm, yanking the phone out of his hand. "That won't be necessary," the officer said, his tone condescending. "You can explain yourself at the station." The sudden, aggressive gesture sent a shockwave through the family. Rachel cried out, clutching Nia tightly as Jamal took a step forward, his fists clenched. "Let go of my dad!" Jamal shouted, his voice echoing through the lobby. The officer's grip tightened, and he glanced back at Jamal with a look of annoyance. "You'd better calm down, young man, or you'll be joining him." Before Tom could react, he felt his hands being pulled behind his back, the cold metal of handcuffs snapping around his wrists. The humiliation and helplessness hit him like a wave, and he struggled to keep his composure. Rachel's face was pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. "This is insane," she whispered, barely able to speak. "He hasn't done anything wrong. You can't just—" "Ma'am, step back," the officer warned, holding up a hand. "We're taking him in for questioning. If you have an issue, you can take it up with the department later." Tom glanced back at his family, his heart breaking at the sight of their fear and confusion. He had spent his life fighting for justice, protecting people from exactly this kind of abuse of power. And now, in the face of his own family's terror, he felt powerless. As they led him out of the hotel, he could hear Jamal's angry shouts, Rachel's desperate pleas, and Nia's frightened sobs. The lobby was a blur of faces, some watching with horror, others with curiosity or indifference. As he was pushed into the back of the squad car, Tom's mind raced. He couldn't believe it had come to this. He had dedicated his career to upholding the law, to ensuring that justice prevailed. And now, his own family was experiencing the very injustice he'd sworn to fight. Sitting in the back of the car, handcuffed and humiliated, Tom's anger began to burn hotter, sharper. He knew this was just the beginning, and that he wasn't going to let this stand. As the squad car pulled away, Tom caught a glimpse of his family standing outside the hotel, huddled together and looking lost. He met Jamal's gaze through the glass, and in his son's eyes, he saw both rage and a silent plea for justice. He made a promise to himself right then and there. No matter what it took, he would fight this. For Jamal, for Nia, for Rachel, and for every family who had ever been treated as less than, simply because of who they were. The battle had only just begun. The car ride to the station was suffocating. Tom sat in the back, handcuffed, his mind racing through a blur of emotions. Rage, humiliation, helplessness. Every instinct he'd honed as an agent was screaming at him to stay calm, to think this through. But as he thought of his family, left standing in the hotel lobby, bewildered and frightened, his anger only grew sharper. The officer driving the squad car seemed determined to avoid eye contact, his expression rigid. Tom could sense the man's discomfort. He'd seen it countless times. Officers who knew they were in the wrong but were too arrogant or frightened to admit it. When they finally arrived at the precinct, Tom was led inside, his wrists still bound. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the tiled floor, and the distant hum of phones ringing and conversations echoing made the place feel cold, impersonal. A young officer at the front desk raised an eyebrow when he saw Tom being escorted in, handcuffed. "What's this about?" he asked, glancing between Tom and the arresting officers. "Disturbance at the Belmont," one of the officers replied curtly. "He and his family were causing issues, refusing to cooperate with hotel security." The young officer gave Tom a skeptical once-over. "A disturbance, huh?" His gaze lingered on Tom, sensing something was off, but he didn't press the issue. Tom held his tongue, reminding himself that any outburst could be twisted to justify their actions. But as he was led deeper into the precinct, his restraint grew harder to maintain. He thought of Rachel, Jamal, and Nia, left alone to deal with the fallout. He knew that by now, word of his arrest was likely circulating, and that his FBI supervisor would soon find out. But even that small reassurance didn't ease the knot in his stomach. They reached the holding area, and as the officer roughly guided him into a cell, Tom finally spoke up. "I want my phone call." The officer sneered, clearly relishing his power. "You'll get your call when we're done with you." With that, he shut the cell door, the metallic clang reverberating in the air. Tom clenched his jaw, anger flaring through him. He had spent years ensuring that people, no matter their background or status, were treated with respect under the law. Now, he was on the other side, subject to the very abuse of power he'd worked so hard to fight. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment, grounding himself. He needed to stay focused. The moment he got his call, he'd reach out to his supervisor. There would be consequences for this. Of that, he was certain. But for now, he could only wait. Meanwhile, back at the hotel, Rachel was struggling to keep herself together. She held Nia close, rubbing her back as her daughter cried quietly, her small frame trembling with fear. Jamal stood nearby, his fists clenched, his face a mask of rage and confusion. "Mom, they can't just take Dad like that," Jamal said, his voice trembling with anger. "They didn't even listen to him. They acted like he was nothing." Rachel swallowed hard, trying to hold back her own tears. "I know, baby, but we need to stay calm and figure out our next steps." A small crowd had gathered in the lobby, watching the family with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. Some guests whispered among themselves, exchanging murmurs about what had happened. Others looked away, unwilling to meet Rachel's gaze. The hotel staff, too, had retreated, leaving the family standing alone, isolated in a sea of silent judgment. One of the guests, a woman in her 60s with a sharp, intelligent gaze, approached them hesitantly. "I saw what happened," she said, her voice low. "They were wrong to treat you like that. I recorded everything." Rachel looked at her, a surge of gratitude washing over her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say." The woman placed a comforting hand on her arm. "I'll send you the video. Don't let them get away with this." Back at the precinct, Tom sat in silence, replaying the events in his mind. He could hear the muffled conversations of officers outside the cell, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter or ringing phone. Every minute felt like an hour, the injustice of the situation weighing on him like a physical burden. Finally, an officer approached the cell, carrying Tom's file. He unlocked the door, gesturing for Tom to step out. "You're coming with me." Tom complied, keeping his expression stoic. He was led into a small, dimly lit room where a middle-aged officer with a serious expression waited. The man looked at Tom, his eyes scanning him up and down with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "Thomas Harrison," the officer began, glancing down at the file in front of him. "Special agent with the FBI, correct?" Tom nodded, his voice clipped. "That's right, and I demand to know why I've been detained without cause." The officer shifted uncomfortably, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "There was an incident at the Belmont. We were called in due to complaints about suspicious behavior." "Suspicious behavior," Tom repeated, his tone icy. "My family was having a vacation. If that's suspicious, then I'd like to know what exactly your standards are." The officer looked away, clearly uncomfortable. "We were following procedure. The hotel reported a disturbance, and we responded." Tom shook his head, his anger barely contained. "Your procedure has led to the unjust detention of a federal agent and the humiliation of my family. I suggest you start making some phone calls, because this isn't going away." The officer hesitated, then rose from his seat, avoiding Tom's gaze as he left the room. Moments later, Tom heard raised voices outside the door. The conversation was muffled, but he recognized the sharp, commanding tone of someone in authority, likely his FBI supervisor, alerted by the call Tom had managed to make before being taken away. The door opened again, and this time, Tom's supervisor, a tall, no-nonsense woman named Agent Karen Mills, entered, her expression cold and controlled. She glanced at Tom, her eyes flashing with anger. "Agent Harrison," she said, her voice steady, "I apologize for the treatment you've endured. I'm here to resolve this." She turned to the officer who had brought Tom into the room, her tone sharp. "Do you realize the gravity of what you've done here? Agent Harrison was detained without cause based on a flimsy report that barely qualifies as hearsay. I expect a full explanation, and I expect it now." The officer stammered, his face pale. "We were just following up on a report from the hotel. We didn't realize." "Didn't realize?" Agent Mills interrupted, her voice dripping with disdain. "That's not an excuse. You treated an innocent family like criminals based on nothing more than vague complaints. This is profiling, pure and simple." Tom watched as his supervisor dismantled the officer's weak excuses, her words precise and cutting. The officer finally fell silent, his head bowed, clearly defeated. After securing Tom's release, Agent Mills led him out of the precinct, her expression still tight with anger. Outside, she turned to him, her voice softening. "I'm sorry, Tom. I can't imagine how this must have felt for you and your family." Tom nodded, his shoulders tense. "Thank you, Karen. I appreciate you stepping in." Agent Mills looked at him, her gaze steady. "This isn't over, Tom. I'm filing a formal complaint with the precinct and the hotel. This kind of behavior can't go unchecked." Tom felt a surge of gratitude, but also a renewed sense of purpose. "I'm not letting this go, Karen. I want every officer and every security guard involved held accountable. And I want that hotel to answer for what they've done to my family." She nodded. "I'll back you every step of the way. This could have happened to anyone, but it happened to you. Use that. Make sure they understand this is unacceptable." Tom took a deep breath, his anger settling into a steely resolve. He thought of Rachel, Jamal, and Nia, waiting for him back at the hotel, still shaken and uncertain. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could make sure it never happened again, to them or anyone else. As he left the precinct, Tom knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger fight, and he was ready for it. As he walked down the steps of the precinct, Tom's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Rachel, a simple text. "We're okay. Just come back to us." He texted back, his heart heavy but resolute. "On my way. This isn't over." Tom glanced back at the precinct, his gaze hardening. The men inside, the hotel staff, everyone who'd made his family feel less than human. They'd all learned soon enough what it meant to cross a man who knew how to fight for justice. Tom returned to the hotel later that evening, exhausted yet driven by an unyielding sense of purpose. As he approached the lobby, he saw Rachel, Jamal, and Nia waiting for him, their faces a mixture of relief, anger, and weariness. Rachel immediately wrapped her arms around him, holding him close, while Jamal and Nia hovered nearby, their expressions tentative but grateful. "Are you okay?" Rachel asked, her voice breaking slightly as she pulled back to study his face. Tom nodded, his expression softened as he looked at his family. "I'm fine," he assured her, his voice steady. "But we're going to make sure that everyone who treated us like this answers for it." Jamal's eyes flashed with anger, and he stepped closer. "Dad, they humiliated you. Humiliated all of us. How are they going to get away with this?" Tom placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. "They won't, son. I promise you that." As they moved back toward the elevators, a hush fell over the lobby. People were watching them again, but this time the atmosphere had shifted. A few guests had their phones raised, capturing videos of the family's reunion, and whispers rippled through the crowd. "That's the family they took in. I heard the father's an FBI agent," one woman murmured to her companion, her voice loud enough to carry across the room. The news had already begun to spread, and Tom could feel the shift in the room, a mix of curiosity, sympathy, and outrage. The whispers grew louder, the curious glances more blatant. Tom exchanged a look with Rachel, who gave him a reassuring nod. She understood, as he did, that this was bigger than just their family now. They had become the center of a storm, and they had a chance to turn this injustice into something that couldn't be ignored. The next morning, Tom awoke to find his phone flooded with missed calls and messages. News outlets, both local and national, had caught wind of the incident, and his supervisor, Agent Karen Mills, had already begun mobilizing a response. Word had spread fast, and by the time he met with Agent Mills that afternoon, the precinct and the hotel were already facing public backlash. In Agent Mills's office, Tom sat across from her, his expression somber but determined. "This isn't going away quietly," she told him, flipping through a stack of documents on her desk. "The media picked up the story, and the public was outraged. The precinct and the hotel are scrambling to contain the damage, but it's clear they know they've crossed a line." Tom nodded, feeling a surge of grim satisfaction. "Good. They treated my family like criminals based on nothing but our appearance. This can't just be swept under the rug." Agent Mills's gaze softened as she looked at him. "Tom, you're one of the best agents I know. And what happened to you and your family, it's unacceptable. But I need you to be careful. This case is stirring up backlash within law enforcement circles, and you're bound to face resistance." Tom's jaw tightened. He understood the risks, but he couldn't let them deter him. "Karen, I've spent my entire career fighting for justice. I'm not backing down now." She nodded, a glint of respect in her eyes. "Then let's make sure they understand that actions have consequences. I've filed an official complaint with the precinct, and we're pursuing legal action against the hotel. I'll stand by you every step of the way." By the end of the day, the story had gone viral. News outlets ran headlines about the arrest of an African-American FBI agent and his family, emphasizing the irony and injustice of the situation. Social media exploded with posts supporting the Harrison family, with hashtags like "Justice for the Harrisons" and "End Racial Profiling" trending nationwide. Clips taken by bystanders at the hotel surfaced, capturing the humiliation and fear on Rachel's face, the anger in Jamal's voice, and Tom's quiet resolve as he was handcuffed and led out of the lobby. The footage sparked outrage, the comments flooding in from people across the country who condemned the actions of the hotel and the police. The hotel issued a hasty, poorly worded statement, expressing regret for any misunderstandings, and claiming they were committed to the safety of all guests. It was met with widespread criticism, many accusing the hotel of failing to take responsibility. Meanwhile, the police department held a press conference, but their response only fueled the fire. They attempted to justify the arrest by citing guest concerns, a vague explanation that only underscored their failure to treat the family with fairness and respect. Back in their hotel suite, the Harrisons watched the news coverage, a somber silence filling the room. Rachel sat on the couch, her arm wrapped around Nia, who had fallen quiet, absorbing the reality of what had happened. Jamal paced by the window, his anger simmering, his fists clenched. "Look at them," he muttered, gesturing to the TV screen, where the police spokesperson attempted to explain away their actions. "They're acting like we did something wrong, like we were a threat." Tom looked at his son, seeing not just anger, but a deep hurt that cut to his core. Jamal was only 17, but he'd already seen too much of the world's ugliness, too much of the prejudice that existed in places they should have been able to trust. "Jamal," Tom said gently, his voice steady, "they can't change the truth. And the truth is that they were wrong. People are seeing that now, and we're going to hold them accountable." Jamal turned to him, frustration etched across his face. "But Dad, you've spent your whole life enforcing the law, and look what they did to you. To us. What's the point?" Tom felt the weight of his son's words, the heartbreak of knowing that the very system he'd dedicated himself to had failed them. But he also felt a renewed sense of purpose. He couldn't erase the pain, but he could show his children, and the world, that justice wasn't just an ideal. It was something worth fighting for. Rachel reached over, taking his hand. "We're with you, Tom, whatever it takes." He nodded, his resolve solidifying. This wasn't just about his family anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been unfairly judged, unfairly treated, simply because of who they were. The next day, Tom and his family held a press conference, flanked by Agent Mills and several supporters from the community. News cameras flashed as they stepped onto the small stage. The media's attention focused on Tom and his family. Tom took a deep breath, stepping up to the microphone. He glanced at Rachel, Jamal, and Nia, drawing strength from their presence. Then he looked out over the crowd, the faces of journalists, activists, and community members all watching, waiting. "My family and I came here for a simple vacation," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We were here to relax, to spend time together, but instead, we were treated as suspects. We were humiliated, detained, and accused, not because of anything we did, but because of assumptions based on our appearance." He paused, letting his words sink in, his gaze steady. "I've spent my career as an FBI agent protecting this country, ensuring that justice is upheld. But at that moment, none of that mattered. In that moment, my family and I were reduced to nothing more than stereotypes in the eyes of those who should have protected us." The crowd was silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Behind him, Rachel held Nia close, while Jamal stood with his shoulders squared, his face a mixture of pride and pain. "This isn't just about my family," Tom continued, his voice growing stronger. "It's about a system that allows prejudice to flourish, that permits good people to be treated as less than, simply because of the color of their skin. It's about the need for accountability, for real change, and I promise you, we will not stop until we see that change." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Tom could see nods of support, faces filled with determination. He felt a surge of hope that this fight wasn't his alone. As he stepped back from the microphone, Agent Mills took his place, announcing the formal complaints filed against the hotel and the police department. The media captured every word, and by the time the press conference ended, it was clear that the story wasn't going to fade quietly. As the family left the press conference, Tom felt a new sense of purpose settle over him. They were no longer just victims. They were voices in a growing movement, a call for change that couldn't be silenced. Jamal walked beside him, his anger tempered by a newfound respect. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you really think things can change?" Tom looked at his son, his own resolve mirrored in Jamal's eyes. "I believe we can make them," he said firmly, "and that's exactly what we're going to do." With that, They walked forward together, ready to face whatever came next. The day after the press conference, the Harrison family's story was everywhere. News channels ran the footage of Tom's speech on a loop, analyzing every word. Social media platforms buzzed with outrage, and hashtags like "Justice for the Harrisons" and "Profiling Must Stop" dominated trending lists. The incident struck a chord, and it was clear that this was more than just a singular event. It was a symbol of a larger, systemic problem. In living rooms, cafes, and offices across the country, people watched the video of Tom standing resolutely before the cameras, his voice ringing with the kind of truth that couldn't be ignored. The raw footage of the family's treatment at the hotel, Rachel's tearful pleas, Jamal's shouts of protest, and the sight of Tom being handcuffed and led away, elicited an outpouring of empathy and anger. Influencers and activists began organizing protests outside the hotel, drawing attention to the systemic issues the Harrisons had faced. Videos of the protest showed people chanting, holding signs that read, "Racial profiling ends now," and "Accountability for all." The Belmont Hotel found itself in a PR nightmare. Their social media pages were inundated with negative reviews and comments demanding answers. In an attempt to contain the damage, the hotel issued another statement, this time offering a public apology. "We deeply regret the incident involving the Harrison family. We are reviewing our policies and working with local authorities to ensure that nothing like this happens again. Our sincerest apologies go out to Mr. Harrison and his family." But it was too little, too late. The public saw the apology for what it was, a desperate attempt to salvage their reputation. The video evidence, combined with the hotel's inadequate response, had already cemented the narrative. The Harrisons were wronged, and the hotel was complicit. The police department faced even greater scrutiny. The press conference they had hastily organized to justify the arrest only backfired, with reporters grilling the spokesperson about the lack of evidence against the Harrisons. The vague explanations and defensive responses left a sour taste in the public's mouth. Within days, calls for an independent investigation into the incident grew louder. Civil rights organizations like the ACLU and NAACP publicly demanded a thorough review of the precinct's conduct. Local politicians, sensing the shifting tides of public opinion, began voicing their support for the Harrison family, eager to align themselves with the growing demand for justice. Protesters gathered outside the police station, their numbers growing each day. They held signs reading, "Justice for the Harrisons," "Stop police brutality," and "End racial profiling now." Chants filled the air as people of all ages and backgrounds stood together, united by a shared sense of outrage. Inside the precinct, tension was palpable. Officers who had been involved in the arrest were called into meetings with their superiors, forced to explain their actions. The higher-ups, facing mounting public pressure, knew they had to make a move or risk losing the community's trust entirely. In a closed-door meeting, the police chief addressed the officers involved. His voice was low but firm, his frustration evident. "You've put us in a difficult position," he said, his gaze hard as it swept across the room. "The fact that you didn't verify Agent Harrison's credentials before escalating the situation is unacceptable. We're now facing an internal investigation, and heads are going to roll if we don't handle this properly." Amid the chaos, the Harrison family remained a beacon of calm determination. They began receiving requests for interviews from major news networks, and though Tom was initially hesitant, Rachel convinced him that their voices needed to be heard. They couldn't let the narrative be controlled by those trying to downplay or justify what had happened. Sitting in the studio of a popular morning news show, Tom, Rachel, Jamal, and Nia faced the cameras, their expressions a mixture of resolve and vulnerability. The host, a well-known journalist with a reputation for tough questions, leaned forward, her eyes filled with sympathy. "Tom, Rachel, thank you for being here. This incident has sparked a national conversation about racial profiling and discrimination. How are you all holding up?" Rachel, her voice steady but filled with emotion, answered first. "It's been incredibly difficult. What was supposed to be a peaceful vacation turned into a nightmare. But we're trying to stay strong, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who's ever experienced something like this and felt they couldn't speak out." Jamal, sitting beside his mother, took a deep breath before speaking. "I'm still angry," he admitted. Angry that my dad, who spent his whole life protecting others, was treated like a criminal because of how he looks. It's not fair. And it's not just about us. This happens to black families every day, and people need to know that. Tom placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his voice filled with pride and sadness. I've seen a lot in my career, he said, his tone measured. But nothing prepared me for the helplessness I felt that night. I made a promise to my family that we'd fight this. And that's exactly what we're going to do. The host nodded, visibly moved. What do you hope comes from all of this? Tom looked directly into the camera, his expression resolute. Change. Real, systemic change. We need to hold people accountable, from the officers who acted on their biases to the institutions that allow this kind of discrimination to happen. This isn't just about one incident. It's about the need to dismantle a system that devalues people based on the color of their skin. The broadcast went viral within hours, sparking even more support for the family. Donations poured in to cover legal fees, and a petition demanding a full investigation gathered hundreds of thousands of signatures. Behind closed doors, the management of the Belmont Hotel and the police department scrambled to contain the fallout. The hotel's owner, a wealthy real estate mogul known for his conservative views, was livid. He summoned the hotel manager to his office, slamming the newspaper down on his desk. "Explain to me how this happened," he demanded, his voice cold. "We are losing business because of this mess. Our investors are furious." The manager, sweating visibly, stammered out excuses. "It was a misunderstanding, sir. We've already issued an apology and we're cooperating with the investigation." The owner leaned back, his expression dark. "A misunderstanding? You've turned this hotel into a symbol of racial profiling. Fix it. Now. Or find yourself another job." At the police precinct, similar conversations were happening. Officers involved in the arrest were placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. The department's legal team advised the chief to prepare for potential lawsuits, and community outreach efforts were launched in a desperate attempt to repair their tarnished image. As the Harrison family watched the media frenzy unfold, they knew they had the momentum to make a difference. Rachel looked at Tom one evening as they sat together in their suite, their children asleep in the next room. "Do you think we're really making an impact?" she asked quietly. Tom took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I do. People are paying attention. They're listening. And as long as we keep pushing, we can turn this into something bigger than us. Something that lasts." Rachel nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and determination. "Then let's keep going." Outside, the city buzzed with the energy of a movement that had only just begun. The Harrisons were no longer just victims of a single act of discrimination. They were the faces of a fight for justice that was resonating with people everywhere. The battle was far from over, but they were ready for whatever came next. The momentum built by the Harrison family's story reached its peak as protests continued outside the Belmont Hotel and the police precinct. The media coverage was relentless, and the public outcry had reached a fever pitch. With pressure mounting from civil rights groups and the community, a legal case was quickly brought against both the hotel and the police department. The trial was held in a packed courtroom, with reporters lining the walls and crowds gathering outside. The atmosphere was electric, filled with anticipation and tension as the first witnesses were called to testify. The hotel management and police officers sat across from the Harrison family, visibly uncomfortable under the weight of the scrutiny. Tom Harrison took the stand first, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the palpable tension in the room. He recounted the events with a measured, authoritative voice, detailing the humiliation his family experienced. The courtroom was silent, every word landing like a hammer blow. He described the moment he revealed his FBI badge and the way it was ignored, a blatant dismissal of his authority and humanity. The opposing lawyer tried to discredit him, suggesting the incident was a misunderstanding. But Tom's experience and poise shone through. "I've worked in law enforcement for over 20 years, he said, his voice steady. "I know what a misunderstanding looks like. This was racial profiling. My family was judged not by our actions but by the color of our skin." Rachel was next to testify, her voice filled with quiet but undeniable strength. She spoke about the fear she felt for her children, the anguish of seeing her husband handcuffed despite his credentials. "We were treated as if we didn't belong," she said, her eyes fixed on the jury. "My children had to see their father, a man who has dedicated his life to upholding justice, humiliated because of prejudice." As the testimony continued, the video evidence was played for the courtroom. The footage showed the Harrisons being harassed by hotel security, followed by the forceful arrest of Tom in the lobby. Gasps rippled through the audience as the recording revealed the police officers ignoring Tom's badge and credentials. The police officers involved were called to testify, their faces pale and their voices shaky. They struggled to explain their actions, their discomfort evident. Under cross-examination, they admitted that they had not checked Tom's identification properly and had acted based on complaints from hotel staff who had cited suspicious behavior. The hotel manager took the stand next, his polished demeanor cracking under the intense questioning. When asked why the Harrison family was singled out, he stammered, failing to provide a reasonable explanation. The prosecution presented evidence of past complaints against the hotel for similar incidents, painting a picture of systemic bias. In the final moments of the trial, the Harrison family's lawyer, a seasoned civil rights attorney, delivered a powerful closing statement. "This case isn't just about the Harrison family," she said, her voice ringing through the courtroom. "It's about the countless individuals who have been judged unfairly, who have faced discrimination simply because of their appearance. It's about demanding accountability from those who wield power carelessly. The time for excuses is over. The time for justice is now." The jury deliberated for hours, the tension thick as everyone awaited the verdict. Finally, they returned to the courtroom, and the room fell into a hushed silence. "We find the defendants, the Belmont Hotel and the City Police Department, guilty of racial profiling and unlawful arrest," the foreperson announced. A wave of relief and quiet cheers swept through the courtroom. Tom exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, reaching for Rachel's hand. Jamal and Nia clung to their parents, tears streaming down their faces. It was a victory, not just for them, but for everyone who had ever been wronged in the same way. The legal victory sparked immediate action. The police department announced mandatory training on racial profiling and implicit bias for all officers. The city agreed to conduct an independent review of its policies, and the officers involved in the arrest faced disciplinary actions, with several losing their jobs. The Belmont Hotel, facing immense backlash and the loss of major investors, was forced to undergo a complete overhaul of its staff and policies. The hotel owner issued a public apology, not just to the Harrisons, but to all who had been affected by discriminatory practices at the establishment. Donations from the hotel's settlement were directed to organizations fighting racial injustice, a gesture that, while symbolic, marked a step toward meaningful change. The story of the Harrison family became a rallying cry for broader social justice movements. It was discussed on talk shows, debated in political circles, and taught in classrooms as an example of the ongoing struggle against racial bias in America. Several months later, the Harrisons returned to their lives, forever changed by the experience. They gathered at a park near their home, enjoying a sunny afternoon together. The air was filled with the sounds of children playing, the scent of blooming flowers, and the laughter of families enjoying their day. Tom watched as Jamal and Nia ran ahead, racing each other to the swing set. He felt a pang of sadness for the innocence they had lost, but also a swell of pride for the strength they had gained. His children were resilient, their spirits unbroken by the injustice they had faced. Rachel walked up beside him, slipping her hand into his. "They're going to be okay," she said softly. Tom nodded, his gaze fixed on his children. "We all are," he replied. "We turned something terrible into a catalyst for change. That's something to be proud of." Rachel leaned her head on his shoulder, her eyes misty but filled with hope. "You know, I've been thinking," she said. "Maybe we should use this experience to do more. We could start an organization, help other families who've been through what we have." Tom looked at her, his heart swelling with love and admiration. "I think that's a great idea," he said. "We can make sure no one feels as alone as we did." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the park. Tom felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they had taken the first step. They had made their voices heard, and the world was listening. Jamal and Nia ran back to their parents, laughing and breathless. "Come on, Dad," Nia called, her eyes sparkling. "Race us to the fountain." Tom grinned, squeezing Rachel's hand before taking off after his kids. He chased them, their laughter filling the air, a sweet reminder of everything he had fought for, everything they had won. For the Harrison family, this was more than just a victory in court. It was a victory of spirit, a triumph over the forces that had tried to silence them. And as they stood together, bathed in the warm light of a new beginning, they knew they were stronger than ever. The battle had been hard, but they had emerged victorious. Together, they were ready to face whatever came next, knowing that they had made a difference, not just for themselves, but for so many others who would follow. And in that moment, they felt a glimmer of hope for a future where justice would no longer be a fight, but a given. Have you ever experienced something similar? Share your story in the comments below. We're here to listen and support you. Subscribe for more voices and stories that deserve to be heard.